right, everybody, welcome back to the Pennsylvania and Berwind. This is episode number 35 in season 2, and today we're going to be working on Pleasantville on the Pleasantville secondary, and this is just right up the road from Moss Creek, the Moss Creek branch where we were working in the previous 2 episodes. And today I wanted to do some work around here and rebuild this town. As you can see, I'm deleting pretty much everything that I've had here, and we are going to redo it. And today's episode is going to be a little bit longer. A couple weeks ago, I ran a poll on Twitter and asked, what is your ideal episode length? And a surprising number of people actually voted in this poll here, 337 votes. And the winner was 20 to 30 minutes at 39%, and then the next runner-up was 15 to 20 minutes. That's where I'm going to ballpark this one, is 15 to 20 minutes. 20 to 30 minutes is just too long for me to talk. So here we've got a 20-minute video today for you guys to enjoy. So there you have it. You spoken, and I'm going to do my best to make some longer videos again, because that's what you guys want. So today on in Pleasantville secondary here, we're going to be rebuilding this town, and there's not a whole lot of documentation on Pleasantville on the original P&B paperwork. So I'm kind of just like making it up on my own. I'm using the basis of what Bill M had already had in the original P&B and how he had it laid out, which I liked. There's kind of a main street next to the train tracks here and a couple little small towny sort of things. So I really wanted to try to keep that sort of feel. And I was a little bit lost in this build because I've been so focused on the WKNS for the past like month and a half, and I haven't done any building on the P&B, so this is the first time I've been back in the P&B, and my brain was just not really sure what I was doing, what assets to use. I totally forgot what ground textures I was using and what types of grass and shrubs and trees, and so there's a little bit of fumbling around in here, but eventually we kind of get some work done. And I guess working in this area was sort of my response to the opposite of the WKNS. I just needed to do something that was a little bit more urban, suburban, rather than totally rural. So that's kind of where I'm going with this one. But don't take this the wrong way or assume that this is like a big town or anything like that. This is really just supposed to be a small town. I wanted to include just a main street or two with some parking and some cool road layouts, because that's sort of just the thing that I enjoy doing, and just kind of go from there. We don't really finish this town by the end of this video, but we've got it laid out, and I still need to make some big decisions about what I'm going to actually include on the other side of the tracks and what I'm going to include just outside of town. I think it's going to sound kind of ridiculous, but I think I'm going to taper it on one side into some farmland, and on the other side, I'm going to make like a lake and sort of a little park sort of thing. I've been looking at Lake Placid on Google Earth as my inspiration. Excuse me, my allergies are like just out of control right now, so I might get a little raspy during this commentary, but I spent a lot of time looking at Lake Placid on Google as my inspiration for this town, because Lake Placid, New York has sort of that main street, like shopping center area, and then immediately right off of Main Street it falls off into some houses and parks, and the lake is right there and that kind of thing. So I spent a bit of time looking at that. This is a little bit more square right now, whereas Lake Placid is a little bit more flowy in terms of the road layout and the way the town is laid out. So I'm gonna have to try to work that in here a little bit so it doesn't feel so rigid. That's sort of one of the big issues that I fall into quite frequently, is that I tend to build things in a grid fashion, and that's not always a best practice. But I'm trying to get better about that. And this sort of made it a little bit easier to maybe get out of that in this particular area, because we're kind of going on an angle through the baseboards. You could call it in the beginning. So I can't really follow the grid precisely, which is why I laid down all that pavement right in the beginning of this episode here, because the grid is all on weird angles, and something happened over the years when I rolled this through a couple different versions of the game, and the ground textures are all screwed up. If you back up a little bit, or if you continue to watch, you'll see the grid is actually going in like 3 or 4 different directions in some places, and some of the grass is it's wonky. But anyway, you'll see right in the middle there is a untextured building. This is meant to be a cinema, and this is a building that I purchased off of Turbo Squid specifically for this spot. But unfortunately, the textures are missing. So right now, as I record this, I have opened a ticket with them because the textures are supposed to be included. And if they're not included, I want my money back. But in the meantime, I wanted to work it in here because it's going to be part of the scene. I wanted it to be sort of a major, I guess, kind of a major element on Main Street, to have a movie theater and some small shopping centers and that sort of thing. So I put it in without any textures. Thanks to Steve Valero for helping me out there. He hooked me up really quick when I was having some issues. He got it right into the game right away. But that was sort of like one of the main elements that I want to include in this area. So again, the whole story, I guess, with Pleasantville, I'll just read right from Bill M's paperwork here. It says Pleasantville milepost 3.4, so that's off of the main line. The former depot is located on the siding and is currently used by crews for maintenance of way functions. Abandoned trackage is visible leading from the siding and branching out to 2 industries in town that are no longer shipping by rail or are out of business. Although most of the rails are still on the ground in town, the tracks are paved over on the spur, crossing Main Street, and weeds cover the right-of-way in most areas. So that's what I'm working off of in terms of the description of Pleasantville. A few miles outside of town, down the branch, if we continue down, we will hit Keystone Power at mile 5.6. So that's going to be a power plant that we will build in the future. And before we even hit that, we are going to have Coal Creek Junction at MP 3.4, and Coal Creek is another branch that continues for, let's see here, about 2.8 miles, and that will be another coal mine that we will model. So the traffic through this part of town is going to be mostly loads and empty coal hoppers. So this is going to be a busy intersection, and I wanted to make sure that it was properly protected, but I also wanted it to be visually interesting. So I spent some time hand laying out these roads and trying to get the markings that might make some semblance of sense. So you can only make turns from certain lanes, or you can't turn, and that kind of thing. Because this seems like it would be a very accident-prone part of town. So I wanted to make sure that I labeled things. I spent a little bit of time, I don't know if I already showed it in this video or not, but putting down some signs, no turning signs, no left-hand turn or stop here on red signal, and details like that. These are the type of details that really bring areas to life, or signs and parked cars and traffic lights and that sort of thing. So always important to include those kinds of things. And maybe if I can figure it out, I will hook up the traffic lights to actually work, and maybe change when the gates go down or something like that. I don't know. I always say that I'm going to do these things, and then I never take the time to do it because I'd rather just build the route and do the modeling rather than all that kind of technical stuff. So here in this town, I'm actually using a lot of my assets that I've been bringing into the game. This is one of them here, this laundromat. These are assets that are available to patrons right now. I haven't really decided a plan on how I'm going to release them publicly on my website or whatever, but they're available to patrons right now. So if you're interested in getting access to all of the buildings I have, I've released like 30 buildings so far. That's in the $15 tier, and I have the links for all of the previous releases, so you could jump in and have access to all of them that have been released so far. So that's my little commercial there. But a lot of these buildings, the one on the corner, the drugstore, there's a post office, which I kind of plopped down, but I haven't used yet. A lot of these structures are ones that I've brought into the game, and I will continue to do so. So that's one of the Patreon benefits right there. If you're interested in that, I plan to continue to do that with different things, different building packs or details. Maybe in the future I can bring in some new cars, because we definitely need some nice new cars for this game. Maybe some new houses and things like that. I don't know. We'll see where it goes, but it's not an easy thing for me to do since I'm not super familiar with 3D modeling, but it is something that I really enjoy, and it really helps me bring in some fresh content to work with, which is always a welcome thing. So here we're working around this abandoned siding here and just trying to detail the back side of this laundromat. and trying to make some sense of this area. And as I had said, I'm kind of fumbling with what assets to use, what ground textures to use, because my brain has been in WKNS mode for a while now, and it is the complete opposite of what this little town is. So it took a little bit for me to get into it, and at the time of this recording, WK isn't even totally done. It's still got some work to do, but almost there. I'm almost there. But yeah, so spending some time detailing around this laundromat, trying to make it feel like a real place. It's supposed to be abandoned or defunct, so I didn't want to spend a whole lot of time making it look good. So I just kind of moved it around, made it look like at some point there was a lot of traffic through here by putting some of these parking lines in here and the road markings, no parking and garbage and that sort of thing that accumulates over time. Maybe some more grass assets and stuff like that in the parking lot to show that it's been aging for a long time might be something that I could add in the future. But overall, I mean, this is a really cool town, and it's really just the only town that is on this branch. The rest of the Pleasantville secondary is mostly through the woods. So this will be a pretty cool scene to come upon when you're bringing your train down to either Keystone Power or the Coal Creek Junction to go coal up. But again, I'm just trying to bring in some of these details that I usually like to, make the illusion that this area hasn't seen any real freight operations in a little while. Things are a little bit more defunct, so that means putting fences in place and burying the track a little bit in weeds and rubble and that kind of thing. And I think eventually I work in like an abandoned boxcar in here to make it feel like, something was just left behind. I don't know why railroads do that. It seems like a really weird thing that they would abandon like a branch of track and leave like boxcars there, or freight cars, but it does happen quite frequently. And it's always really cool to see, like, if you're driving down the road or something like that, and you see some abandoned looking rails and then there's an old boxcar hanging out back there. That's always in real life like a cool thing to see. So I wanted to make sure that I incorporated that somehow. Here I was trying to put in a fence gate, but it's obviously not going to work. So I said, forget that. Let's bring in just a regular rusty old fence, close it off. Clearly the tracks are not being used. The sidewalk has been replaced over top of the rails, but the crossings still remain in place. So maybe it's considered out of service. Like maybe they'll reactivate it one day, and who knows? I don't really know what kind of business this would be. But use your imagination, just some kind of like freight house maybe, or some sort of a warehouse, something like that. Maybe one day we could do a version of the P&B where we open that back up and have some operations going in there again, because that might be kind of neat. And adding to the story like that just is definitely an interesting point of view on the backstory, I guess. So continuing on with the rest of this town, I used a lot of these Dave Snow, I think they're called Main Street buildings, or downtown street. I can't remember what they're called. You can rewind and look. But they tend to work pretty nicely. They fill up a good chunk of the block, and they look like they've got restaurants and shopping centers and stuff like that in there. So the look is perfect for this particular location. And right behind the buildings, I wanted to include a parking lot. I don't think I recorded me building this entire parking lot, because you guys have seen it a million bajillion times, and I didn't want to bore you to death with it. But I did want it to bring in another section of buildings on the back side here. So the main street that's parallel to the railroad tracks there isn't the only spot that has these shopping centers or anything like that. You can go around the block, and then after that, I think we'll taper it out into some countryside sort of stuff. But in between, I wanted to make sure that there was an area for maybe some trucks to come in, since usually the deliveries will come in through the back of these buildings. And I think some of them have loading docks. So I want to make sure there was some space behind there, some alleyways, and then some parking, of course, because you need parking for the shopping center, and you definitely need parking for the movie theater. So I had to include all of that. And of course, I had to take the time to decorate the parking lot by using these planters. It's called a tree grate, in case you're wondering. And I did take the time to line them all up and spread them out evenly in between the sidewalks here. And I think you could kind of see that I'm counting the blocks in between to make sure that they're laid out pretty evenly. And then just planting some small, short trees in there. You don't want to put anything too big, because it's just supposed to be a small planter, which just adds a little bit of color and breaks up that gray parking lot Of course, we got to bring in some ground textures as well to make it look like the cars were parked there and they're leaking oil, because that's what happens in real life. And I think, yeah, at this point, we're back over behind the laundromat. And this is where I started to kind of really get stuck and decided that I was going to begin to wrap up this episode, because I wanted to detail around here and detail that maintenance of waysiding, this whole section right here. But my brain was just drawing a blank at this point. So I begin to lay out some of the new structures, and oh man, look at those old grass textures. I got to get rid of those. I begin to lay out some of these buildings that I wanted to replace in there, and I adjusted the track a little bit, tried to bring in some fresh ground textures, but for some reason the juice was just not flowing for this spot. So I'm gonna have to revisit it, come back and sort of sit on it for a little bit, decide what I want to do. I'm kind of thinking in this space behind the building, this sort of triangle space right there, maybe putting an old foundation or something like that, like sort of to imply that there was a business on that right of way that's torn up right there, that siding that's torn up. So maybe there was a freight house there or something else. But like I said, I couldn't find exactly what I was looking for, and I kind of just felt like I was forcing some stuff. So I just leave it as it is right now, and we're going to jump over to the gas station after this clip in 1 second here. And we're going to delete that old gas station, and we're actually I'm going to place this gas station, and then I'm going to delete this one. And the idea is, I kind of realized when I placed this one down, it was kind of out of scale. It felt small when I placed it down, but then I placed the car next to it, and I was like, yeah, this is in a person. I was like, this is definitely way too small. So I do end up replacing that with something else. I use the TBS gas station from the back shops, which it actually fits a lot better than this one. But I didn't want to use the gas station from Jointed Rail, I think it's a Sunoco one, because it just looks too modern. I kind of liked the Sunoco one here because it looks sort of older. It's not, from the 90s or, early 2000s, whereas the Jointed Rail one looks like it was just built in 2015, so the P&B is meant to take place sometime in the 80s or 90s. I mean, really, it's kind of an ambiguous time. I try to keep it wide open for anybody to, interpret it how they want, but I wanted to keep something that wasn't so modern because I didn't want to, I didn't want people to feel like they had to run modern equipment on it, because I don't run modern equipment on it. I like running Alcos and all kinds of old stuff on it. So, and that's sort of the vibe that it's supposed to have. It was, this route was supposed to be more of a short line, and I think I might have overdeveloped it a little bit into something a little bit too class 1E almost. I don't know. But anyway, it still works. So I ended up using this BP, which sort of, I don't know, looks kind of modern, but it also looks like it could fit in the 90s or the 2000s. So it is what it is. It's gonna work. It'll be okay. But when we come back to the P&B, I'm gonna try to develop this area a little bit more. I need to decide what I'm gonna do on either side of the tracks in the background and how I'm gonna fill some of this space, because I don't want it to just be like a town was just plopped here in the middle of nowhere. I do need to have some kind of transition to it. But that is going to do it for this voiceover, this commentary. We're going to jump into just some short cinematics here, and that is going to do it for me. And I'd like to thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.